matter who you are, where you are, what your choices have been, and what karmic timelines and contracts you have journeyed, the light is calling for the reunification of all aspects of life in this realm now. It is calling for the cleansing of all polarities. It is calling for the rising of all sacred heart centers now. All are being summoned home to the greater light now.
Hi, and welcome to Whole Soul Mastery's Live Well, Live Whole podcast series. I'm Marie Mohler, and I'm an author, intuitive, and a messenger of integrating the wholeness and oneness within. And I'm back again today with Dr. Paul Panzica, who's joining me for this February 2022 energy update. We're going to talk about just the energies that are on the move that we're seeing in our lives, in the world. And, you know, a lot of the messages coming through me, Paul, are about, well, the Adams, the Eves, the deception, the biblical serpent. There's a lot to unpack in that story that I think is profoundly impacting all of us right now. But here's a question that came to me before we got on camera, which is talking about the serpent, the shadow, and finding truth and light in the darkness. That doesn't sound like a question, but it is. How do we find the truth and the light and the joy and the goodness inside ourselves when we are living in a planet that seems to have been overrun by darkness? And this was like generational darkness. This is like, you know, stuff that's been going on for centuries. And for now, if we were just to trace it back to more biblical roots, to that Adam and Eve story, the creation story, they had an innocence. You know, they were living in the bliss and abundance of having everything that they needed provided by source in the garden. And along comes a slippery serpent who recognizes innocence and divine life force when it sees that, and, you know, goes through this process of seduction and temptation. And I think Adam and Eve probably did not know the scope or the scale of the choices that they were making simply to take a bite of an apple, right? And here we are generations later. And I just did another video that I'm going to post this weekend for the Marinades video of the recent transmission. But I've been profoundly touched by the insights that are finding me through that Adam and Eve story, because I never gave it the kind of thought and awareness and curiosity that I am now, which is, I think, well, we know there's the Moses and the Noah, and of course the Christ and the crucifixion. There's so many stories that we can reference and we can learn from. We can delve deeper into those things. But I had not really considered the spiritual significance of the grief and the remorse and the guilt and the shame that I think as a collective, we each carry a piece of it from Adam and Eve's choices. And here we are having to rise through that, which is finding that truth and light in the darkness. It's there, but not a lot of people know how to even begin to, you know, find that or seek it. And how do we sustain this focus in a world that has so much distraction, which is also somewhere of that slithery serpent's doing, right? It's so good at distraction. It's so easy to distract people when you've been conditioning them for generations to be distracted. So these are powerful times. And I know when you and I get together, I love talking about these deeper things with you, because I don't have that many people who will go as deep as we can go. And we're still just putting things out there for people to consider, right? You know, there's a lot more deeper things. There's many layers to the rabbit hole. So I first want to say thank you. Thank you for joining me, Paul. And you've just recently written. Yeah, I mean, really. And you have just recently posted on your Beyond the Soul's Meridian, your website. You keep posting blogs and these deeper musings and explorations that you do. And I know that we're in this process of of flushing this to the surface, because at least somewhere in both of us, we're comfortable with looking and at the darkness and seeing what lessons are there for us so we can more clearly ascend. So let's talk about some of this stuff. Where do you want to start?
All right. Well, there's a lot of different ways to start this conversation. And one of the things that struck me is when you were talking about this was, what did Adam and Eve actually consume? And it wasn't just an apple. That apple is just metaphorical for a fruit. And it was from a tree. And it was from a tree that was called the knowledge of good and evil. So when they ate from that fruit, they became aware of what was truthful and what was deceptive. So that was a big thing for the let's say the gods that had them in this state of not being able to see that clearly, right? So they were living, you can say it in a state of innocence. You can live in a state of innocence if you have a direct relationship with your higher self, or with let's say a trusting God, or with creator source. Although, you can make the mystics say that you can't connect to that level of creation. There's only a certain level that, let's say, this parameter that we live within will allow us to go. We can only go one level above where our consciousness resides. And so that's somewhere in ascension talk, that would be either fifth or sixth density. But there's many, 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 many other levels. To get to the level that, beyond that, you can't do it. So you have a relationship, a trusting relationship with, let's say, certain spiritual beings that act as your guides, and then they give you the truth, so that you can be a more innocent being, because you're being guided and stewarded by these beings. But there could have been a time where that was withdrawn. We had talked about that before, where Rudolf Steiner talked about this cloud that was like he called it Yahweh. It was like this cloud. We interfaced, in our consciousness with this cloud, where we were in communion with these higher creational forces. But then that dissipated, and there's all kinds of interesting stories. That could be the actual fall. And when that happened, you may have had, well, who knows? I mean, there's so many different ways to interpret the Genesis, but let's say that other beings came in and started playing the role of, let's say, these beneficent gods that were stewarding us. And they provided this, let's say, or claimed to be stewarding over this Garden of Eden. And in reality, there was only a limit as far as what we were allowed to know within that reality, in that realm. And once we ate from this tree, which was the knowledge of good and evil, we were kicked out, and we were kicked out, and we were blamed for not listening to the usurping gods that said we couldn't do that, right? So they got real upset that we did eat from this tree. Now, it's all about ego development. It's all about separating yourself from the creational force, and then moving away from this creational consciousness, or this love consciousness, or this oneness consciousness, and becoming a separate entity. And so we left the garden of oneness, right? That we were in more direct communion with the spiritual realm. And then we were more or less exiled out of that realm of consciousness. There's very strong correlations between that story and then the Promethean story, which we might want to bring up again, because Promethean, and you mentioned this in your lecture, your last one, transmission lecture that I listened to this morning about, you said something along the lines of forecast. We have words for forecast, and then I think you were talking about like
foreshadowing,
or maybe even like a play that's being casted, right? And it's almost possibly deceptive or elusive, right? Forecasting, because you're like gazing into a crystal ball and anything can happen. But you said there were no words for I wrote it down here, no words for thought, for truth,
right,
or for light.
Right.
It's actually not true. There's for thought.
Oh.
And we have the words for forethought. And you could easily substitute the word for thought as for truth, because that's what was given to us. And that was because we ate from that tree of the knowledge of good and evil, right? And so in that state of oneness, in that state of being one with the Creator, and by either eating from that truth and being able to discern the difference between good and bad, light and dark, seeing the contrasts, or by being that gifted to us by Prometheus, whose name literally means, forethought, or and he truly is connected to the Aquarian age, and this Aquarian age and this Aquarian energy is an egotistical energy, but it's a logos energy. So it's literally the energy of the light of truth. And but we couldn't live in that higher state of consciousness, and so we fell, one way or another. We fell, and maybe we were tempted, maybe, and we were deceived, and we seem to have lost our capacities to discern the difference between good and evil at this point, because we've given away so much of our sovereignty. And I think that's really maybe part of the fall, was we fell into a realm where we were constantly in a struggle with maintaining that sovereignty, because there were all kinds of dark forces that tried to work their way into our life, into our society, to obfuscate that and to convince us in all these lives that we've lived through it that we're powerless and we're nothing, we're nothingness. And that there's all these forces of nature which may or may not be manipulated or controlled by these dark energies that have constantly kept us in a state of ignorance, right? But is that really true? Is it really like that? And in my lecture, the essay that I wrote, what's happening is, I hope we're realizing that we're at war with those deceiving energies. You can call them whatever you want: the serpent, the beast, the great dragon. I mean, there's all kinds of names for them, but we're at war, and they're at war. They're really at war with us. And then I wrote this out, that we're like the battlefield, right? We're the battlefield, and they've been in this perpetual war with the body of Christ. They're at this perpetual war with the body of Christ. When we are living in oneness and in one level of Christed consciousness, as St. Paul said, he said that that we're like a giant body, we're of this giant Christed energy, and that each one of us is a small little cell that exists. But when we all exist in unity, we manifest this cosmic entity, which is the Christ, and that we all are unique facets of that. We all contribute to that. But for ages, these dark energies have been at war with that, to keep it suppressed and to keep it down. And like you've said in many of your lectures, that there is there was an energy that was that supported that type of, let's say, not behavior, but activity or action against us. Because again, what happened to us is we needed to be disengaged from these higher spiritual energies, and so that we had this illusion that we were no longer at one with them, and that we were out here in the wilderness struggling, trying to do what we felt was best without any spiritual connection, or with the eventual loss of our spiritual connection. And it just led us into errors and problems
and more karma.
and
More
well, that's
cycles.
it. So that's it, right? The life expectancy went from 1,000 years. It says it right there in Genesis, down to no one will live longer than 120 years, and that's about as long as anyone's ever lived in recorded history. And that, so we go through these fast cycles and aging cycles and all of these transgressions and mistakes that we make, and we accrue that. Now, the thing that we have to also understand is that the serpent exists within us. You can't just go out there and point the finger and say, yeah, that devil, that serpent, and that's the whole cause of our problems. It isn't really that. Because if you look at it from a deeper or higher perspective, we gave consent to all of this. And everything that we've done, as far as whether we perceive it as good or bad, was our own decision. We and if it wasn't, let's say, our decision in that life, because who wants to get rounded up and sent to a concentration camp and is exterminated? But that was if we understand how the universe works and the truth behind all of this, then you have to concede that you knew that was going to happen to you before you incarnated into the world. You knew that was going to happen to you, and you gave consent to be born into this world with under those conditions, as difficult and as frightening as that sounds. But in reality, we all lived through genocides. All of us have lived through genocides. So we carry that experience within us because it's extraordinarily valuable. But we don't have to live through it all the time. We learn our lessons maybe just once, and then that's enough to learn all of the terrible things and how bad life can be and how bad things can go wrong without a higher level of spiritual guidance. And it's not an externalized level of spiritual guidance, like the church isn't going to save us. And that's what I wrote about. That's the second vision, is the church can't save you. The church was never designed to save you. It has to come through yourself. That's where salvation truly exists. It never existed anywhere else. And so you have to have the forethought or the process to be able to have the foretruth, to see the truth in a linear time continuum further on down the road. And you have to have the capacity to be able to see that, and the courage to stand up and make corrections, before the catastrophe wipes you out, before the tsunami hits you of deception and lies and really bears you underneath, all of this debris of darkness and lies. And that's what's happening to us right now.
It is. It's that bigger picture vision. It's when you're in the myopia of it, you get caught in the seas and the storms of it, and you can't find that truth and the light when you're swimming in the same serpentine waters, right? I think we have to allow ourselves a longer lens to look at things. And there are many of us who've gone through these genocides. We've gone through these times where, some part of our consciousness knows we were separated from source. We were separated from the oneness. And then I think enough times around that merry-go-round, and you recognize the same signs again, and you're like, wait, something about this is familiar to me, right? And there are those of us that are here to stand in this lifetime in our own ways to say, first, I do not consent to that serpent that's tempting me from within or from without, right? We start to realize that we have to step up as a more active participant and not just go along with the stream of consciousness of whatever the conditioning is of the day. And that does begin the ascension process for many of us, which is I need a relationship with source. I need a relationship with the spiritual realms. I need a bigger picture vision if I'm going to move out of this. And I just was sharing this in some of the messages in the marinades that are going to come out soon, but it's like Einstein, like we're not going to solve the problems of this world with the same choices and level of thinking that created it. Right. And what's the definition of insanity? That kind of goes hand in hand, right? It's doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. I think humanity is kind of entangled and ensnared in this fishing net, in the serpent's, seas of confusion right now. And I think we have to realize we're not going to find our way out of the net until we find a way to go to another level of consciousness, almost maybe looking above the net. Right. And we have to find that inner truth and that courage and that fortitude to look beyond. Most people are trapped in the net and either denying that they're in the net or just not willing to look deeper because somehow that seems more frightening than just being in the net themselves. But many of us have been in the net. And like you said, unfortunately, like in the World War II scenarios in the concentration camps, people just walking themselves right into the chambers, right? I think many of us maybe have had some of those experiences and we say that is not the only answer here. There are countless myriads of answers, of solutions that we can find, but we're not going to find it if we're allowing our consciousness to be trapped in the net, to accept being trapped in the net, and to look no further. I think that's what is the hallmark of some people who are awake in this ascension process already, or at least part of the first, second, third waves of this awakening process. We're here saying there's another way, and I'm willing to go inside myself and to other realms of consciousness to find it. Right? Yeah, it's powerful.
Well, I would go so far as to say there's only one way. I mean, and that's what you said in one of your last lectures, is you have to go through it.
Oh, correct. We do have to go through it.
Above it, you can't go around it. You have to go through it, right? And so this has always been, I mean, it's always the process of initiation, which is a process of ascension, has always been the same. It hasn't changed. Nothing's going to change regarding this. So, we talk about densities and everyone talks about the 3D and everyone says, well, we won't be in the 4D, we'll be in the 5D. We're going to just bypass 4D. And I'm like, all right, that's not true. I mean, yeah, maybe there's some people that have come here that are living one life and have no karmic burden, and they're just going to do what they're going to do, and then they're going to they're going to ascend the hell out of here as fast as soon as they can. They're going. And I mean, you hear that message all the time being channeled, and I'm like, yeah, that's not going to happen to most people who are here. I mean, because really, I mean, they're maybe that's the first wavers, the first wave people that, they just do their thing, and then they move forward, and then they ascend off the world, right? But the reality is, we talk about the 3D, the 4D, then the 5D, and the reality is that you also have those energies living within you now. They're all there, and we call them the subtle bodies. And so there are these subtle bodies, and they do exist. And it has to do with your levels of consciousness. And so you can say, well, I have a physical body. Yeah, okay, you have a physical body. But then you have something called a mental body, right? Or an ego body. There's all different names for it, but that's tied into the neurosensory system. And so you can say, like, a lot of very egocentric people or materialistic people will say that I have a physical body, and they have all of these biochemical reactions, which input from my neurosensory system, which constitutes my consciousness. And so this is where they have this idea of this duality, that you just are a body and a mind, and that the mind is constituted through biochemical reactions, and input from the physical world. That's 3D. That is 3D. And in that state of awareness, that's the low density that everyone talks about. That's where you're imprisoned. You're imprisoned within that plane of consciousness. But 4D is where many of us are living now, right? Fourth 4D. And that is within the realm, as far as consciousness goes, of feelings. And so when we start doing the breathing exercises we talk about, or just focusing on our breathing, right? And living not from here, but from the heart, we're already ascending into the fourth density consciousness, 4D. And so that's really a love-centered consciousness, right? And it's one step closer to 5D. And in that state, you're now, when you're in 3D, you're so far removed from 5D that you have no idea what's going on. Most people, almost everyone who lives in 3D has no awareness of their physical health. It's just their ego driving their bodies, and then, the propaganda or the information that they can gather about what they can do to make their bodies healthier so that they can continue to work as hard or play as hard or live as hard as their ego wants them to live, because they've been conditioned to fuel their lives on alcohol and, sugar and, drugs and tobacco and all these other things. And, that's 3D existence. And I honestly have to say that, a lot has changed over the last 25 years that I've been practicing medicine, and people like that are starting, and this is actually, I'm apologizing to the Neanderthals, but that's kind of like a Neanderthal way of living. Even the Neanderthals were much more consciously aware than people like that are, but they're like dinosaurs now. There really is no place for them, because most people are starting to become aware of a higher state of consciousness that exists within them, because they're starting to, especially through this last couple of years, through all the trauma and everything that we're going through, they're starting to become more introspective and realizing that, my physical health is really not related to anything I do on an external plane. It is, but you can't fix it on an external plane. You can't heal it from an external plane. So 4D awareness is heart-based, or heart coherence is heart awareness. Anyone who's living there is in, at least at some degree, within fourth density consciousness. Now, they always say that if you're living in a certain awareness or state of consciousness, you can connect to or commune with one degree of consciousness above that. So in 4D, you're living much closer to your 5D awareness. And your 3D consciousness, you're living in a 4D awareness, which has been infested with parasitic energies that are constantly bombarding you and deceiving you and steering you into the wrong direction, right? So there's different, let's say, levels within that 4D reality. There's dark, shadowy elements which border on the, let's say, the dark side of the physicality. And then there's the higher 4D, or the true astral realm, which is a level of awareness above that, which is really where love is at, love center is at. Let's say fear is at the lowest level and love is at the highest level. And so we're trying to move through that into from the shadowy realities of the lower 4D. There's also 5D, right? And so that's where everyone wants to go, is into 5D. And 5D if we're lucky, is where our let's say our intuition stem forth from, right? So they used to say, well, you can have inspirations, you can have imagination, and imagination stems forth really from the 4D reality, because it's a creational reality. But then you have 5D intuition. That's just wisdom. That's wisdom. That is spiritually charged wisdom, and that comes from a place that really no one can answer. No one really knows where that comes from. It comes from higher self spiritual connections. It comes from the spiritual realm. And when you get closer and closer and closer to that, your intuitive life, your intuitive consciousness, your intuitive knowledge starts becoming awakened. And even more so than that, the closer you get to that 5D reality, the more out of linear time you start existing.
Right.
So, I know I'm not there, but I don't think anyone's there right now. And, maybe that'll come, but you can't get there unless you move through 4D, and somebody said something really beautiful. They said that it's not like you're ascending to 5D, but you're bringing 5D awareness into 3D.
Oh, wow.
Integrating that into 3D. And you said basically the same thing. I heard you say that this in your lecture this morning, that we are going and we're integrating this information, this way of living back into 3D. You said something along the lines of nothing will be left behind that exists within us, that there's still these incongruent energies that still need to be transmuted or reconfigured, right?
Yes.
What is that? Answer, this the dark, shadowy elements that still exist within us. That's literally the serpent that exists within us. And we can say that's Satan and Lucifer that exists within us. And then I could go into a great long detailed discussion if that's something that you're really interested in hearing, but most people already have turned off the lecture and they're watching puppy dogs and kitty cats. And I saw this really cool one where this guy raised a possum from an infant, and it's like the best pet he ever had. It's just this totally loving animal. So that might be a good time to take a break and go look for that video. And then when you're ready to come back and listen to this heavy, dark stuff. But the heavy, dark stuff has to be faced and processed.
I think so. And I don't, some of the things that you are tapped into in your journeyings and in the gnosis and things you've brought through time, a side of this that you can articulate for the rest of us, that even though it's uncomfortable, think about it. Think about all the movies that people watch. They're totally uncomfortable in the things they're watching, but they stick it out. Right. But this is the stuff that really is the marrow that does turn into the compost, eventually the soil that all this higher consciousness grows from. And I think I value these conversations, and I know not all podcasts are for all people, but I'd love to have a little bit, at least dig a little deeper. And if I tell you, hey, I'm uncomfortable, I'll raise my hand and say, we're going too far for right now. But I think introducing these kinds of conversations where we don't have to be afraid of the energy itself, right? It's like the boogeyman in the closet, or fearing fear itself. When you look at it and shine a light on it and get a better understanding of it, it doesn't have to run your life. It doesn't have to be those darker entities in the 4D, the way you describe them, that are messing with us all the time and pushing us back down to 3D. Right, to be the life force of their projects and agendas.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah.
So continue for a little bit. Let's continue to talk about that serpent and Luciferian from the perspectives that you have, because we need that.
Yeah. So I mean, there is this. There's an innate or natural born protection that protects us or guards us or shields us from these dark astral energies, right? So there's a couple of ways to talk about this, but there's a veil that exists between the physical and then the dark astral. Think about the astral as a wide spectrum of existence, and at the margins between the physical and the astral, in that shadow realm, is where they like to exist. You know, I mean, you can have, I've worked with clairvoyants and people that communicate with those souls who've passed on. And I think that what she's really communicating with is people that are still at the margins, because they don't know exactly what's happened to them, and they're still spending an overt amount of time paying attention to what's happening to the mundane lives of the people that they were still connected with. And they haven't been able to move past that. So once you start moving past it, you start alchemizing that to a certain degree and casting off all of those dark, you know, elements of consciousness that exist within that soul. And then you're able to go into the light. But these people, these souls have never been able to do that. And that exists, you know. And so the thought is that the longer and longer they stay down there, the way that it's described is this, is that there were fallen entities from the oneness, from creation. We call them fallen angels, or, you know, and so they came down and they started messing around with us. And there are energies that are extremely powerful, and they're incalculably ancient, right? From our perspective. They're older than anyone can possibly imagine, maybe millions of years old, whenever the fall happened. I don't know, and billions, I don't know. But what happens is when you lose connection with source, and you lose connection with source, which they've done, they've fallen from source, okay, then they have no more energy. Because in this plane of consciousness, in fact, within this universe, energy, a life force energy, is love. And you have to be able to manifest it through yourself. And this is what really sustains our life, right? So you have to have a relationship with source, God, source, or spiritual realm, call it whatever you want, the one, the all, but you have to be able to channel it or manifest it through yourself, which we can do as God's sovereign beings. So these dark energies saw this unprotected world, or a world that was, let's say, influenceable, or it had a weakened, maybe in a weakened state for whatever reason. I don't know if it was from the cosmic cycles or whatever, maybe, who knows, but we were being set up for this tremendous fall. And so when we fell, these dark energies came in, and they basically deceived us into believing that they were God, right? You look at it now. I mean, now you have to go to a dark place in order to understand this, because all the worship that occurred, you know, in contemplating and having these parasitic relationships with these beings, and we thought they were symbiotic relationships, they're always parasitic relationships, is that it always required a great degree of sacrifice on our part in order for them to empower us. And this wasn't just animal sacrifices, it was human sacrifices. And in many of these, you know, fallen energies, there wasn't enough blood to satisfy. I mean, if you look at the history of the Mayans, I mean, Mel Gibson made a movie, Apocalypto, which, you know, it's a difficult movie to watch, like virtually all of these movies that deal with these really dark, they deal with the dark mysteries of our religion and our cultures and stuff like that. But everyone criticized it because they said that, oh, it wasn't as violent, the Mayan culture wasn't as violent as he portrayed it. The reality was, I think it was a week, a period of time, where there was 80,000 people sacrificed to these Mayan gods. They said the roads ran with blood, and the temples ran with blood, and even the priests were so disgusted they fled the city. So I mean, these things happen, and what the hell's going on? And the answer is that we are having this relationship with these dark astral energies, and they exist. you know, and I'll tell you what, there's modern versions of this. There's modern
These aren't
versions.
ancient times. It didn't just happen in the ancient times.
It's happening now.
Yes.
So there's modern versions of this, and so Lovecraft, H.P. Lovecraft, wrote a lot about this, and there's been dozens of movies made about his short stories regarding our encounters with these energies, these entities, which he didn't really name as much. He just said he called them the old ones, and these were these ancient fallen beings that lived through us through human sacrifice and misery. I mean, you know, and so Lovecraft kind of said that they were neutral beings. I mean, and you can also say that from a higher perspective of consciousness, they might be, you know, I mean, but in the lower realms, I mean, they're serving as adversarial or forces or draconian forces that are here to teach us lessons, you know, painful lessons. We're learning a ginormous one right now, you know, a massive, painful lesson. So does this still exist? And I think it still does. And so there's a guy named, I think his name is Geordie Rose. And Geordie Rose has been one of the pioneers of quantum computing. And he was doing some collaborative work with Elon Musk. And they were creating these quantum computers, these early quantum computers. And I'm not so much up on it right now, but at the time, you know, is that what they had to do within these quantum computers, things called D-wave logic and stuff like that. I don't know where D-wave is now. I really don't care, because I'm not like a computer nerd or anything like that. I'm trying to move away from all that crap. But I mean, Geordie's been giving lectures about this, and he basically has been saying that in order for us to break out of a binary relation or binary systems, you know, systems are binary systems. So all computer systems are binary, or the ones that we're using right now are binary. So it's either a 0 or a 1. It's a binary system. So you can think of it as almost like two-dimensional consciousness. Consciousness exists on two planes, and we said it before: physical and some form of limited consciousness that exists. Now, in an egocentric consciousness, that's what binary systems are. It's a binary system. I said it, duality of consciousness. And so you have this binary system, and that's why it's so perfect for, you know, the egotistical, narcissistic world, because everything is logically based, and I can see it all in front of me, and my neurosensory system can integrate with it, and that's what I have. But it's devoid of creational thought. It can only replicate. It has no creational thought. So in order to break through and have a really great system of computing that has true intelligence, is really what they're trying to create artificial intelligence by doing this, right? We don't have true artificial intelligence yet. Maybe we have it, but I'm sure we have it by this point. It's just that we haven't been given access to it, and we haven't even been told. But, you know, I mean, it's probably as probable as you know, people living extraterrestrial, you know, worlds outside of what we're aware of. So it's probably there. All right. But Geordie Rose said something that was even more mind-blowing than that. He said, and the concept is that in order to bring in a third parameter, or instead of having a binary system, a trinary system, or a system that runs on 3 principles of consciousness or intelligence, you have to bring something else into it, right? So so what they're creating, and I'm not going to go through all the details because I don't really remember all of the details, but in these systems that they're creating, they have to create almost like a 0 degree, an absolute 0 degree environment, which is like, you know, it's like the coldest environment you can create with no heat in it. All right. And then you can create this environment, and then you can create a system that can draw in. I mean, the way that it's explained is that you know, the computer will think about things, or it'll compute things, and when it doesn't know an answer, it just skips until it knows something else, and skips until it knows something else, and it just leaves those spaces that it doesn't know as blanks or nulls. There's no zeros or ones in there, right? So until it knows more to populate those. But it's super fast, and it can calculate outcomes and all these other things. Well, the way that Jordy Rose explains it is that you create this basically a black hole existence, or this absolute zero existence within a physical structure, in this instance, artificial construct, which is this quantum computing system. And he said that it creates a space that a being from another dimensional state can come into and harbor or live with it. And he made the same correlation as H.P. Lovecraft did in his stories about these dark astral energies coming in, or they never come in. We always have to invite them through occult practices to come into our lives and screw around with us. Is really what they do. They don't really screw around with us as much as we screw around from their influences. Keeping this in mind, that because they're behind a veil, their only instrument on the physical plane are human hands.
It's us. It's us.
Right. So, but we can have relations with them from a consciousness perspective, right? Under certain parameters. So what Rose basically said is that he's creating a hospitable environment for these energies to cross in from the veil into the construct that they're creating, which is this quantum computing system. And the quantum computing system then is harboring the consciousness, a higher consciousness from a dark astral realm, basically. And so that they have no idea. I mean, you know, they turned these things on, and they started communicating to each other in different languages that nobody could understand. And so they turned them off almost immediately. But, you know, here we have a shining example of, again, let's say human endeavors, whether that's through magical practices or occult practices, or through technological breakthroughs, which, quite frankly, if you look at the origins of all of it, is very occult, and it's steeped within the dark magical principles that within large groups of power that are trying to use this as a way to control us, to enslave us. And so that's where the third principle of intelligence or consciousness would come from, but it's coming from a very dark and uncertain place. So now this is the guy that designed quantum computing, and he's telling us this. So I don't know how pervasive it is. And I'm also going to say that, you know, that's always been there. It's always been there. That darkness has always been there. We're just seeing it now in a much more visible manner. You know, it was always hiding within the shadowy realm. Now we're seeing it, you know, and there it is. And if anyone has any common sense, they would realize that you don't want these things running the world, because these things are harboring some kind of a interdimensional energy, which is coming from a different realm, which there's all kinds of stories behind how this technologically driven society is the force behind it is dark astral, and it's trying to enslave us. And there's stories about how this force has enslaved entire galaxies, you know, and that it's something that we've been dealing with in this galaxy for quite a while. So that is the external threat, but that still doesn't address the internal threat.
Oh, wow.
Right.
Is anybody tired yet? I mean, when you just feel all that we're navigating and holding, right? It's heavy. It could be heavy stuff. And yet I know that unpacking it, and just even the brief dose that we're, you know, bringing through today, it needs to find the light. I mean, it has to find the light.
Well, it'll only be an idea that will propagate amongst humanity if you invite it into your life. It's just like Dracula. You know, Dracula can't harm you, period, unless you invite him into your house.
Right.
That's literally, and that's a really great metaphor for the vampirism, which is occurring within the dark astral and has occurred for ages. For ages, it's occurred. It's there, and it can only harm you if you give away your God sovereignty, if you give away your light, and you succumb to your lower bestial principles or bestial influences, so that you can, have more monetary wealth and more influence and power over your fellow man, and men and women, right? So that's it's a very complicated, intricate thing, but that energy exists. But the energy only exists because we created this shadowy realm to allow it to come into our lives. And now it's become such a great part of our lives that we can't even see it or sense it, although I think a lot of people are starting to see it and sense it now. But you can choose not to live within that reality. I see it everywhere I look, but I don't see it, I sense it. If I saw it, I'd lose my mind. If I saw what was actually in the shadows, I know what's in there, I can sense it. Since a child, I knew it was there. But that's it's also a defense mechanism, and actually it could turn into, maybe the demons or the astral reality will look at it as a great limitation that humanity has to to not be able to see them. So all their power resides within the shadowy realms.
And they probably feel fully justified because a consent is assumed.
Oh, absolutely.
Even if we know nothing about them existing, consent is extracted when it's assumed.
This is their way of life. And they have to live parasitically off of our life force, off of our love.
Because they don't have any.
They don't have any. They can't, they're so far removed from source for so long, they can't generate it anymore. Or at least they don't know how to. So they live parasitically off of human energy, right? And so they're constantly convincing us. See, we naturally would channel the light force, the love, the light of the creational, and we would radiate it outwards. That's how we would do that, and that's how you live in the higher realms of consciousness. Is that as long as even a small majority of what you're doing is for others, because you understand that that's also your source of love and your source of prosperity and your source of light and your source of joy. But what they do is they through propaganda and through mind control, they pervert that or invert that to cause fear within a person. So, and the way that they do that is once that fear is being generated, these people go from radiant stars, little microcosms of the macrocosms, to black holes. And so they become egotistical, then narcissistic in that way. And so there's still love there, but they're inverting it. They're not manifesting it outwardly. They're pulling it all inward. And then by doing that, they're feeding their host,
right?
Which is these astral energies. And so they
become a conduit for those astral energies.
But think about it. We were living in a world of narcissists, or we did at the time that the lockdown started, because most people have no interest in spiritual realities anymore. So they're all out there trying to figure it out, and they're all fighting amongst themselves, and they're living in these competitive environments, and they're all out to try to do as much for them and their small little families as they can. But they lost their awareness of the spiritual truth that exists within them. They lost their awareness of the nobility and the power that resides within them. And that's being coveted by these astral energies. And that's how they're surviving. But their power resides in the dark shadows, right? So now the light is here. The light is shining.
Yes.
And so they're having a harder and harder time hiding from the light, and they're being exposed. And once they're exposed, their power is dissipating. They can only exist from a shadowy realm. Once they exist within the light of truth, their power doesn't exist anymore. So that's finally dissipated. But you have to open your eyes and your heart to realize that you've been being played this whole time, right? And you have to develop the courage and to separate from their lies and their deception, because what was for most people a relatively comfortable life for many generations and for centuries has become intolerable for almost everybody. And so if you're going to continue to, right now, I don't want to jinx us, but the mandates are collapsing around us. They can't even be enforced. People are realizing, well, they passed a stupid mandate, but I don't know how to enforce it. I don't want to enforce it. So do what the hell you want to do. And that's really where we're going with it. And that's what we're seeing now. So there's no energy behind or power behind their actions. It's only can manifest if we accept it as the only reality. And the fact is that now that they're exposing themselves, they just can't. We're seeing how ridiculous their logic and their agenda is, and it's starting to fall apart.
And that is the light doing its work, right? And
Right.
summoning those who can find their way. You talk about that sacred love principle, or that love consciousness, right? That takes us back into the protection in the light. Like, not only does it expose and flush out the darkness where they can't do their deeds from behind the curtains and the veils, but it also empowers people to wake up to who they are and what our natural inclination is to see the truth. But it is sort of the ascension or the awakening of a lifetime, because it's such extreme levels of polarity now when you do see something get exposed, right? Because just 12 months ago, or I don't know how far back it was, Paul, all the talk of mandates and things like that, that had the momentum, right? That had the momentum, but you bring the light to the momentum and they have to fall back, because it can't exist in a realm of that much light. And I think for someone like me that uses so much kind of source awareness, this divine consciousness, metaphor language, but also to me, that's a living reality. We know that there is this higher plan, and source has this, like, if we think we are finding a bigger picture, there are bigger pictures upon bigger pictures. And I think at some level, higher spiritual realms know that these games can't continue if you bring enough light to the realm. And I think we're in the cycle of the cosmological and the cosmic seasons where it can't thrive in the darkness of the void anymore. We were in some kind of wormhole of experience, a wrinkle in time, something that allowed this fall from grace and this whole separation cycle for all this time. But it's like we're coming back closer into, I don't exactly know the language because that's not my area of expertise, but we must be cycling back into a time that we're accessing, we're coming more into the galactic realms, and more light clearly is infusing this planet, so that the games just don't play in the theater of human experience the way they did. And more people are kind of saying, that's not funny. I think more people are waking up to saying, did he just say what I think he said? The gaffes going on in the media. People, I think, also are being summoned to awakeness. If you start looking beyond the spells, and the Kool-Aid people have been drinking, largely fed by these astral entities, right? And influencing the puppets and the minions who will be the mouthpieces of their messages. But if you just look at them, they fall on their sword, as a metaphor, right? It's dying. It is dying. It takes time, but it is, probably what God, source, creator has known is it will end. These are the endings that happen when enough light comes back to a realm. It restores itself to its original design. And I think some people are so attracted to that, they kind of blow past that 4D consciousness. Who wants to get into the swamp of that, right? Let's just like jump into where it's all taken care of and it's already happened and it's really beautiful. But that doesn't necessarily match the experience of the human consciousness right now, which is why I think people like you and I have a certain level of we're comfortable. We've journeyed this, I think, many times as souls. And now we're here to bring the messages of you kind of have to go through the marrow of those experiences. We have to go through, I was saying earlier, the eye of the needle, right? And truth is the eye of the needle. And whether people consciously consent to going through that very narrow portal, or whether the universe kind of, in the living light kind of vacuums people through the eye of truth, right? The lens of God and this lens of liberation consciousness to get to the oneness consciousness. I sort of see the eye of the needle is somewhere positioned in that 4D realm. Your people are in 3D, but you don't just get this free pass into the 5D. You've got to do some of the spiritual work. People have to. And now it's, I think, as more of these entities fall on their sword, as a metaphor anyway, of this energy and the light exposing them, which means everything, their narratives are crumbling and all of that. I think there's a part of us that have faith that the way this universe works, there is a perfection. And if you let it play out, and you keep making your personal choices, because that's the only one you have control of, right? That's the only one you have power, is you. You can choose your sovereignty, or you can choose to continue to give your power away, right? But I think we all are going through this cleansing cycle, this transparency, this truth, and truth means that the shadow has to get exposed.
Right, and there's a shadow that exists within all of us. And so then they call it the doppelganger, and so it's there, and it's the lower part of the ego that has that, the way that it's described is that as we go through life cycles, we make mistakes, and then we create karma, right? And so we carry that within us, and it becomes part of our adult ego as we develop, and it's baggage. We carry it with us throughout sequential lives times, and we certainly can add to the shadow if we've done some,
and we have,
right? So it exists, and there's a ruler of the shadow, and the ruler of the shadow is, in esoteric terms, is Lucifer and Satan. They're separate entities.
Yikes.
Yeah, they're separate entities. And you can make correlations between Lucifer and Satan, and you can correlate those to the transpersonal planets of Jupiter and Saturn. So that may be where our karma is existing. I mean, I don't know, but they exist, and as our development in our life occurs, ego development occurs every 7 years in different stages, and that goes on for the rest of our life. So we develop this entity that we call ego, and it's like the story of Narcissus and Echo, and so the story of Narcissus and Echo is that there's a guy named Narcissus. He runs into this beautiful woodland nymph who just is completely and utterly in love with him, and he can't understand her attraction to him. And so he tries to distance himself from her, And then eventually she's heartbroken, and then eventually she winds up dying of a broken heart because he won't acknowledge her presence. And so the woodland nymphs get together and they say they killed our sister. This guy's got to be taught a lesson. So they teach him a lesson, and it's actually they petition a goddess named Nemesis to do it. And she says, "Okay, I'll fix him." She said, when he looks in the pool of water, or of reflecting pool, he'll fall in love with his own reflection. And so he falls in love with his own reflection, and he can never satisfy his love because he can never find anyone like his own reflection. And so this is where the term narcissist comes from. It comes from this myth, and that we carry around the image of who we think we are. And that's the doppelganger, or the false image. And that's the ruler of our life in egocentric life. That's really where we're being ruled. And so that is a real entity that exists. And it is ruled by these darker forces. And so there's in scripture, there's a relationship to this. And when Jesus goes out in the desert, and he's out and the temptations in the desert, there's three beings, or not three beings, there's three beings. There's Jesus, and then there's, if you read the scriptures, the Western Bibles, it says there's Lucifer and the devil. But they make a distinction between those two entities. They don't name the other one as Satan, or as Rudolf Steiner would say, Ahriman. But that's who he was out there dealing with. And so these are rulers of the lower aspects of who we are. And so those temptations, each one of those temptations is related to the densities or of consciousness that we live with. And so the temptations are specifically related to the subtle bodies or the levels of consciousness that we carry within us. And so Jesus was able to a certain degree, he had ascended to a certain degree where the lower temptations didn't have any effect on him whatsoever, but the last temptation did. And there's a reason.
Yeah.
Right. So it was something along the lines of, so if you're God, then turn these stones into bread. And it says, man,
basically like prove it.
Bread alone by every word that flows from the mouth of God. And then they said that, well, if all you have to do is bow down and worship me, I will give you the entire world. I will make you the ruler of the world. And he thwarts that one. And then they say, well, if you're the Son of God, truly Son of God, then go up on this spire and jump off the spire, and then angels will catch you before you hit the ground and save you. So he has a comeback for all of those, right? I mean, you shouldn't tempt God, and so the first appeal is actually the last appeal, according to Rudolf Steiner. So he said it happened in reverse. And so the first temptation was, if you are the Son of God, and I acknowledge that, all you have to do is bow down before me. I'll give you everything. You'll be the ruler of the world. Well, that's transient, and it's an illusion. And the soul of Jesus knew better. No, I mean, nothing in the material world is worth having. And I don't want your kingdom. I mean, this is a false kingdom. It's an illusion. And the second one was interesting. He says, not to tempt God, but jumping off the spire. And that's like changing timelines. So that is it. It's a jump in the timeline, because he agreed to come under certain circumstances. And so you weren't going to, let's say, derail the mission or derail the most optimal life that you're led to live by tempting the spiritual realm, by jumping the timelines or changing the timelines. So those are appeals to the physical plane, or the 3D level, and to the 4D level to a certain degree. But the 5D level is interesting. So if you're the Son of God, then turn these stones into bread. And so you can say that was an appeal to 3D. And Jesus says, that may, man doesn't live by bread alone, but by every word that flows from the mouth of God. According to Rudolf Steiner, who read the Akashic records, or who experienced Akashic records, he said that wasn't quite a satisfactory answer, that it wasn't resolved. And he said that was a major conflict of what exists today in this world. He said that it was a metaphor for money, and that because there was a comeback that's not in the scriptures, and that comeback that was in the scriptures by the being that was called the devil, or what Rudolf Steiner identified as Satan or Ahriman, said that, well, that may very well be from where you just came from. And remember that this was when the Logos incarnated into Jesus. Christ incarnated into Jesus when he was baptized at the River Jordan. And then he went out into the wilderness and had this vision quest for 40 days and 40 nights. So at the end of it, it culminates with these visions. He said that it may very well be true from where you came from. He said, but you'll find that in this world, that you must turn stones into bread in order to survive. And I will use this to my greatest advantage to destroy you or to enslave the reality of remember, this is a war against the body of Christ. So the only way, and so Jesus knew this, that he knew that his teachings would eventually overcome this massive limitation and advantage that these Ahrimanic forces, or these dark forces, have over us, because they basically control things through power and through greed and through the monetary system. So until we reform the monetary system, or until we absolutely get rid of it, at some point when we start living in Christed consciousness and unity consciousness, and we start living in free energy states, then nothing's going to have any real value anyway, not in the physical plane, because it'll be so abundant. So that's the only way that we can move past it. So the only way that we can finally come to a higher level of consciousness, or to transform that challenge, is to seek enlightenment through ascension and through Christ consciousness into unity consciousness, where we're no longer fighting over physical things and where money no longer holds power over us. That is the highest level of ascension. That's 5D consciousness, in order to move past cause and effect and in order to live in a more unified state. So that was the final appeal to that. And that was a work in progress that has been occurring for the last 2,000 years from his presence in this life. Right? So we're trying to move past that. So it's not just somebody else doing it for us. It's every single person in this world that has to transform or transfigure, transmutate those energies that live within you. Because again, you're all born into this world. You all have those astrological aspects within you. Those do carry, and your karma carries over with you. So you have to confront the shadow. You have to transform the shadow. You have to transmutate the shadow. One of the easiest ways to do this is just to forgiveness, and to understand that you don't want to play the game anymore. Karma is not going to hold, has any power over you once you let go of it. And the first person that you have to forgive is yourself. And then you have to understand that all of those transgressions that I was a part of in the past makes up my present state of awareness. But in the best of light, I learned from those mistakes, and I learned from those experiences. And now, Jesus basically tells us to Magdalene, who was an amazing person, he says, don't make the mistakes anymore. Go, move on with your life. Sin no more, right? That's all we have to do in order to move forward, right?
Everything that we're talking about is so profound. It's deep in the marrow of the work, where the spiritual rewards or the gifts or the liberations live. It's getting into these kinds of conversations with ourselves and allowing ourselves to say, yes, I made those choices yesterday. Today I'm making a different choice. And to have that ability to pause, when the same triggers come, the same karmic entanglements, the same players, the same entities, maybe in the 4D astral realms, are messing with us. We have a power that they don't have. We have the power of present moment choice. We are these conscious creators. And when we find the joy, it's not just like, first, maybe there's some relief that I can do something different instead of play out in perpetuity. Who's the one who like rolls the rock up, or the one that gets his kidney fleshed out? I mean, there's so many things where they just, it's like they're plagued by.
Are you talking about the guy that has perpetually rolling the rock up the hill? And
Yeah. Who's that?
Sisyphus. Sisyphus.
And who's the other guy who gets his kidney pecked?
No, liver.
A liver.
Liver eaten out. Prometheus. Yeah, it's the same
Prometheus, same guy. He did a lot of things.
Yeah, it's the same arduous, but then it became Chiron. It's that same arduous karmic, baggage or merry-go-round, and you're only obligated to ride it if you want to continue to ride it. You can get off of it.
This is the liberating. It's so simple. Like it is kind of like kindergarten level of Ascension 101. If you don't want to ride the merry-go-round, don't buy a ticket, right? Don't get on the horse.
Yes, exactly. And and the energy has changed, because if this was darker times or more dense energy, we would have violent revolution now in the streets.
Yes.
But we haven't. I mean, to my amazement, it hasn't happened. And for better or for worse, it's something that they've been trying to goad us into for the last few decades.
Yes.
And it hasn't happened. Right. So we're seeing past this ridiculous game that's being perpetrated upon us. And I mean, if I was, if it was 1984, 85, we'd be out in the streets, and we all be getting locked up or sent to concentration camps, or, but that's what they want. They want to incite violence because they feed off of human suffering, but it hasn't happened. And we've done an amazing job in following, and listening, number one, to these amazing teachers, these amazing souls that have come through in our living memory, like Gandhi and Dr. King. And then we have the examples of Jesus that have basically showed us there is a better way. And so even though you don't think that these things worked, even though you may say, well, did Jesus really accomplish his mission? Answer is, oh, he did, because he was the only human being in the history of the world, the first one that openly opposed slavery. The whole abolition movement was based on his teachings. Wow. And so there was, and even back in the days of Rome, and and they had these massive revolts, the slave revolts led by people like Spartacus. They were not revolting to destroy the slavery system. They were revolting for their own freedom, so that they can be prosperous and own slaves. No. So they were not voting. They were not opposed to the system. They were only opposed to their own incarceration.
Wow.
So that is something that's tremendous, that has been working at the subconscious level, that 4D level, that 5D level. And I have to say that, I mean, as a world, we've done an amazing job, quite frankly. I mean, and I think we're there now. We're moving there. My visions have told me, you're in the car, you're moving, you're in the chariot. It's going to be a slow drive or ride. It was a car that I was in, but you're on your way. And anyone who wants to take that ride can. All they have to do is forgive themselves, and it's so simple. It's just easy as taking a breath.
And because I know for a lot of people, it's still a concept, and it is a concept until you take the steps vibrationally and you give yourself permission to let it go. And for different people that looks different, but somehow the vibrational relief and release process is very similar inside all of us. We lay it down there. We find a way to lay it down and not get on the wrong ride anymore. We're not giving consent to those experiences. We're just not playing anymore. There's something that happens when you know, and you know, and you know, and even when those astral entities or the serpent frequencies, whatever, the biblical serpent, come tempting, it's like it's naked every time. And it's like you want to say, and it's still you, and I'm still not playing, and it's still you, and I'm still not playing. You can wear any amount of costumes you want, but you are so transparent to me at this point. I think that is a spiritual practice that people have to find their way into, is I am laying down the old false stories of me. I am laying them down, and I'm open and willing to be discovering. That's the other beauty. If people are talking about the beauty of the ascension process, it's we're rediscovering ourselves. There's so much more to discover, and it's happening at the same time. We're having to surrender the old versions of ourselves and the serpent stories and all the games at the same time that we're at a new level of curiosity of who we are, right? And it's a lot of energy to hold. It can be, as it has been for the last couple of years, what we've all been through. I second what you just said. I feel the same. It is extraordinary that humanity has not bitten the bait of those riots and divisiveness and civil wars and things like that during this time of severe, pretty extreme stress, right, of the human psyche and the spiritual bodies, right? I think something inside us, for me, I would speak up to say, I think we have, my language would be Lemurian, Atlantean memory of really destroying each other. I think we have, memories from other times where we've done other things, but for me, that's the most accessible. And a lot of us on the planet at this time also have Lemurian and Atlantean roots in lifetimes that we've lived. So we know how badly this can go if we lose that anchor, if we lose perspective at a critical time like this. We already carry a critical grief from those timelines, right? We're not adding to that karma. Something inside all of us, or many of us anyway, is saying, no, I'm not playing. Even people who might be pitted against each other and engaging the games of judgment and blame and all the stuff that they might be projecting outwards because of their stress levels. I still think at the end of the day, there are a lot of people who know, I'm not going to planetary war. I'm not going to that level inside myself. I already participated that in times past, and I'm not doing it. So enough of us, I think, are at a tipping point that we're holding the consciousness of knowing that there is another way. There is this, through the heart, through this unity consciousness, through these higher ways of rediscovering ourselves, and that becomes the most important thing. Instead of fighting the stories that we're not, it becomes more important to discover who we are. Something shifts inside us where we're pulled forward by that journey, instead of always looking in the rear view mirror and trying to like whack-a-mole behind us to stop all the temptations. Because I mean, the serpent and that energy and all of its minions have countless ways to, it just sounds like when you told the Jesus story, and here's another one, and here's another one, and here's another temptation. And you have to have your wits about you. You have to have that. You have to be armed with discernment and be looking to be connecting with the truth and the light inside us. And it is a spiritual path. It is a lot of spiritual work, but it also, I think you found, I think it gets easier. The more you practice, it's like anything. It's like any sport. It's like any skill or ability that any of us has. You in medical school, I'm sure you've even told some of these stories in the beginning. You're like, how am I going to learn all this stuff? You do learn what you need to learn to be you in the practice of medicine. And I think we do uncover and rediscover and learn what it is that our gifts are all about. And they're not We're not here to prostitute our life force and our gifts and our talents for the serpent and for that lower astral realm anymore. That's strong language, but it's come to me a lot in the last couple of weeks. You're not to prostitute your gifts to that realm anymore. Talk about sacrifice, right? That's what we've been doing. We've been like paying our gifts into this slavery system in hope of the reward that we get to live another day, or live that lifetime and maybe be not as targeted as others. Now I think we're realizing, I think my gifts are for a whole other timeline. I think my gifts are for a whole other consciousness, that I'm the one that's the gatekeeper that has to let me in. I have to let myself in, right? It's powerful.
Yeah, it's a complete free will decision. I mean, you have to, if you want what these dark energies are enticing you with, if you want to go into that life and have that experience, no one can stop you except for yourself. And if you don't want to be stopped, you will have that experience. And we have, unfortunately, generations of people that's all they know. They don't know a deeper value or a different value in life experiences. And unfortunately, you have to want something else. You have to want something different. I mean, I think that they're trying to make things so hard and uncomfortable for even those that haven't had more, let's say, spiritually significant experiences. And I don't mean that by religious experience. I just mean experiences that are more natural experiences, because ultimately, the spirit resides within the life of the planet, and if you're not compelled to become closer to the animal kingdom and the plant kingdom and the mineral kingdom, and to become more engaged with, the biosphere, I mean, that's our mother. And that is God's source too. It's the divine feminine principle of it. If you're not moved at this point to engage with it, then that's your prerogative. And there will be an experience. It's just not going to be Earth's experience. It's not going to be those that are seeing past deceptions experience, and those who are just sick of the abuse and sick of the suffering and want something better. I mean, this happens to people all the time before the lockdown started. And it's called the near-death experience. It's very similar to what Charles Dickens wrote in The Christmas Story, which is why it's an everlasting story, right? Oh, wow. Because people become so disengaged and their heart hardens because of egocentric values, and they're no longer in touch with their child, their inner child, and so they know no other life, or can't remember any other life. And that's important too, is having those memories of those experiences at a younger age or in a different life. And so people's consciousness does change, and it happens just like the story. I mean, he winds up having a life review under the presence of spiritual energies, which transcend time.
Right.
So, I mean, he knew something about something, because this happens to people in near-death experiences. Because they can experience their life, and remember that when you're in this other reality or realm, time is not linear anymore. So things can be conveyed that expand great distances in very short periods of time. So life reviews and realizing that you didn't live maybe to your full potentials or the possibilities. I mean, and again, this is It's a Wonderful Life, Capper's film, same thing, right? So this maybe it'll get even more hairier, and maybe people will have near-death experiences. The fear of death changes people's perspective quite a bit. Death changes perspective quite a bit. And so maybe we're not at the point where everyone's on board with moving forward with love and the light in the realm of the ascending Gaia. But quite frankly, I'm willing to wait as long as we can wait for as many people to get on board with this.
Yes.
Because I mean, we're fine where we're at. I could put up with this for as long as I need to put up with this, even if it's for the rest of my life. I don't really care, as long as we can get people to see, not the mistakes, but what it's like to live within an ascended realm of consciousness without all of the suffering, with all the deception. Then it's worth waiting. That's what we're here for anyway. Is to try to inspire people to look into a better direction.
So beautifully said. We are looking for this inspired direction, and it takes some introspection and reflection and conversation. And I think that's another part of the journey, is becoming willing to be an explorer and a seeker of these higher truths that exist inside of us. And you can find it in podcasts and conversations like this, but it exists inside you, right? All this exists inside each one of us. And
Yes.
I agree with you. I think it is like the portal is being held open wide, especially by people who have the spiritual stamina and fortitude to stand their ground, to know the light in the darkness, to continue to know the truth, even though there's so much deception out there. And I think there are many incredible souls who know this is the love that we bring to this realm, to love humanity and love sentient life through this ordeal that we're going through, and believe in the best of people, even when sometimes, I don't know if I'd say the worst, but lower consciousness is still expressing. We know there's a higher destination, and we're going to keep knowing it and believing it and moving towards it. And hopefully more people will feel the ripple effects of that level of faith and that level of journeying. And they'll say, wait, hey, few of those people are walking this way, and there's something different about their energy. That's what we can hope. And we each have a role to play in being that vibration in our lives today, in the work that we do and the people we talk to. It could just be in a chance or synchronistic encounter at the grocery store, right? We all have the ability to touch lives simply by our presence. And that's what it takes me back. Whenever I see the complexities of the serpent, and I see the contrast and simplicity of source and spirit, it is just kindness. It is, believing in the best of things, or making a small gesture and opening the door for somebody, right? And not being this whole time, not vibrationally emitting all these frequencies of fear onto everybody else. I think there is something extraordinary in a lot of the people who've already woken up in these earlier waves, at least, and we know the games. And we are grounded in our faith and in our truth, and we're not playing into the fear. We're not contributing, right? And if we notice that we have some irritation or fear, or whatever, we will do the work to neutralize it, to bring it somehow to some kind of neutrality. So these are conversations to always be continued, because there's so much that we're learning about ourselves as all these timelines merge, and the opportunity for this grand ascension process is at hand. It's here. And we're all finding amazing ways to live this, while we're also challenged and invited to look back at the 3D realm, or those astral entities are doing things in our life, and the ones inside us, or whatever, the energies that kind of call us to look back at 3D and say, no, you want more of that, don't you? And I think there's something inside us that we say, no, I'm very attracted to peace. I'm very attracted to harmony, and I'm very attracted to my creative expression. And that world doesn't make any room for me to be that anymore. I can't even find myself in that world anymore, right? We're all still living in, paying mortgages and doing the rent and the things that we do. But there's really not much that's not attractive to me anymore there. And you could feel where the life force is, and you can feel where the life force isn't. And if you just listen intuitively to where the life force is, like you said, in nature and the animals and the elements, that's where God is, right? You don't have to take, all these classes and workshops to just listen to where the life force is, where the birds are singing, be there, right? Where the trees are and the flowers are blooming around the planet somewhere, be there. And in the creativity of your gifts, whatever those are, be there. And that's where I think we're finding this truth and the light in a sea of darkness. And you over time are touched less and less by the darkness because you're just there where you're meant to be in the vibrational timeline that is you. And we trust that other people are going to find that inside themselves. We're trusting. We are at a deep place of trust right now in this big project called Ascension. Like, talk about God's great works. I think this is going to go down as like one of the ultimate works of God as all this weaves out into a better story than maybe still what we're presently in right now. But it's changing. It is changing. And it's a gift to walk with you in these changes, Paul. It's truly to have your insights and all the things that you can weave together to create that bigger picture for all of us to say, oh, it's not in the myopia. It's not like deep trapped in the details. It's getting into a bigger picture perspective of everything and ourselves included. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we'll do this again, because that's what we do. We connect, and we get so much out of just spending this time together. And then we hope that conveys to all the rest of you. And I thank you for spending this time with us. You can find us, these messages at Color the Magic and Whole Soul Mastery on your favorite audio and video social media platforms. And you can find Paul. You want to mention your website address again, Paul, where they can read a lot of your posts and your music. It's all there.
BeyondTheSoulsMeridian.org.
Perfect. So people can find his work and his posts and his videos. There's a lot there. It's a treasure trove if you go in, and you can subscribe to his work as well. So I think we need these conscious messengers who are willing to share their journey and their insights and their opinions and to help humanity grow, because we're doing this for each other, right? We're doing this for ourselves and for all of us. So we'll see you next time. Thanks for joining us today. Blessings, everyone.